When I pulled into my driveway after a week-long business trip, I immediately knew something was wrong. The house was empty. No porch furniture. No flower pots. No welcome mat. Nothing. For a few seconds, I just sat there staring. Then I noticed the lock. It had been changed. My stomach dropped. I got out of my car and tried my key anyway. It didn't fit. Not even close. My name is Savannah Pierce. I'm 33 years old, and 2 hours after returning home from a business trip, I discovered my own parents had sold my house behind my back. At the time, I thought that was the worst part. I was wrong. The worst part was why they sold it. I called my father immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Dad, why doesn't my key work?" Silence. Then a sigh. "Where are you?" "Outside my house." Another silence. Then, "Come to our place." My heart started racing. "What happened?" "We'll explain when you get here." The call ended. 40 minutes later, I walked into my parents' dining room. My mother wouldn't look at me. My brother Ethan sat comfortably at the table scrolling through his phone. And my father was smiling. Actually smiling. I knew that smile. It was the same one he wore whenever Ethan got away with something. "Sit down," Dad said. I didn't. "Why can't I get into my house?" My father folded his hands. "Because it isn't your house anymore." The room went silent. Even though I already knew the answer, hearing it out loud felt like being punched. "What?" Dad leaned back in his chair. "We sold it." My mother flinched. Ethan kept staring at his phone. Nobody looked guilty. That was the shocking part. Nobody looked guilty. I stared at my father. "You sold my house." It was the right thing to do. My pulse pounded in my ears. The right thing for who? Dad smiled again, then pointed at Ethan. "Your brother." I looked at Ethan. Finally, he looked up. Smug. Relaxed. Completely unbothered. Dad's smile widened. "Your house paid for their vacation." My stomach tightened. "What vacation?" Ethan grinned. "Maldives." The room spun. Dad nodded proudly. "He's been improving himself." I laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. Dad frowned. "Why are you so calm?" I looked directly at him, then at Ethan, then at my mother, and finally said, "Because the house you sold wasn't actually mine." The smiles disappeared instantly. My father's smile vanished. Ethan sat up straighter. For the first time all evening, nobody looked comfortable. "What are you talking about?" Dad asked. I pulled out a chair and finally sat down. Not because I was tired, because suddenly I wasn't in a hurry anymore. The panic belonged to them now. I looked at my mother. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than anything. Dad leaned forward. "Savannah." I ignored him. Instead, I reached for the glass of water sitting on the table, took a sip, then set it down. Slowly. The silence was driving them crazy. "Good." Finally, Ethan spoke. "What do you mean it wasn't yours?" I looked directly at him. The property wasn't legally owned by me. His confidence disappeared. Dad frowned. "That's impossible." "No." I smiled. "What's impossible is believing you sold a house without checking who actually owned it." My father's face hardened. "We had paperwork. That got my attention." "Paperwork? Interesting. Because I'd never signed anything authorizing a sale. Not once." My stomach tightened. Someone had. But it wasn't me. Dad stood up. "Stop playing games." "I'm not." "Then explain." I folded my hands. The house was owned by a trust. The room fell silent. My mother finally looked up. Dad blinked. "A trust?" I nodded. "The same trust Grandpa created before he died." Now my father's face went pale. Because Grandpa hadn't trusted him. Everyone in the family knew that. Especially Dad. "What trust?" Ethan asked. I almost laughed. Of course Ethan didn't know. He never cared about paperwork. Or responsibilities. Or consequences. Dad looked nervous now. Actually nervous. "You're lying." "No." I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened an email. The trust documents. The same documents Grandpa's attorney had sent me years ago. I slid the phone across the table. Dad grabbed it. Read the screen. Then went completely silent. Because the trust still existed. And, according to the documents, the trustee wasn't me. It wasn't Dad. And it definitely wasn't Ethan. It was someone else. Someone with complete authority over the property. Someone who would never have approved the sale. My phone suddenly buzzed. A text message. Just 6 words. They finally sold it, didn't they? My blood ran cold. I recognized the number immediately.
The trustee.
Grandpa's attorney. The one person my father never wanted involved. Then my phone started ringing. And when I saw the caller ID, I knew the nightmare my father had created was about to get much worse. My phone rang for 3 straight seconds before I answered. Nobody in the room moved. Nobody spoke. My father stared at the screen like it was a loaded weapon. I answered anyway. Hello. Savannah. The familiar voice sent a chill down my spine. Thomas Whitaker. My grandfather's attorney. The trustee. The man who controlled every major asset inside Grandpa's trust, including the house. I assume you're aware of what happened. I looked at my father. Yes. A long silence followed. Then, did your father authorize the sale?
No.
Did you? No. Another silence. This one colder. More dangerous. Finally, Thomas spoke again. Then we have a problem. Dad immediately stood up. What problem? I put the call on speaker. Thomas didn't hesitate. The property was never eligible for sale. The room froze. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means, Thomas replied, someone sold an asset they didn't legally own. My father's face turned white. For the first time all evening, he looked scared. Not nervous. Scared. Thomas continued. The trust agreement is very clear. The property cannot be sold without trustee authorization and beneficiary approval. Ethan looked confused. So what? I almost laughed. Because Ethan still thought this was about a house. Thomas's next sentence changed everything. So the transaction may constitute fraud. The room exploded. What? Ethan shouted. Dad slammed his hand on the table. That's ridiculous. No, Thomas said calmly. What's ridiculous is that nobody contacted the trustee before closing. Dad's confidence cracked. I could hear it in his voice. We had documents. Send them. Silence. Thomas repeated himself. Send every document used during the sale. My father said nothing, because suddenly we all understood something. The paperwork wasn't the problem. The signatures were. And judging by the panic on Dad's face, he already knew it. Then my mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard. Everyone looked at her. Tears filled her eyes. What did you sign? The room went silent. Dad wouldn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because whatever he had signed, it wasn't just going to cost him a house. My phone buzzed again. A new email arrived. From Thomas. Subject line. Urgent. Buyer has filed a complaint. My stomach dropped. Because suddenly there was another victim in this story. And, according to the email, they were already on their way to my parents' house. The doorbell rang 15 minutes later. Nobody moved. Not my father.
Not Ethan.
Not my mother. They all looked at me, as if somehow I was supposed to stop what was coming. I didn't. The bell rang again. Then a knock. 3 sharp hits against the front door. My father finally stood. His hands were shaking. Just slightly. But I noticed. Everyone noticed. He walked to the door and opened it. 3 people were standing outside.
A man.
A woman. And a real estate attorney. My stomach dropped. Because I immediately recognized the couple. They were the buyers. The people who thought they had purchased my house. The woman looked exhausted. The man looked furious. The attorney looked ready for war. Richard Collins, the attorney asked. Dad nodded. The attorney handed him a folder. You sold my clients a property you didn't own. The room went silent. The buyers walked inside. The woman looked close to tears. We moved our entire family here. The husband nodded. We sold our previous home. My father couldn't even look at them. Because suddenly this wasn't just fraud. Real people had been hurt. Real families.
Real lives.
The attorney opened the folder. According to the title review conducted this morning, the ownership chain doesn't match the closing documents. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? The attorney looked directly at him. It means somebody forged legal authority. The room froze. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Dad looked like he might collapse. Then, the attorney pulled out another document. A signature page. The same one used during the sale. My blood ran cold. Because I recognized the signature instantly. Not mine. Not Grandpa's attorney. Not the trustees. My father had signed it himself, using a fake authorization. The attorney placed the paper on the table. This signature is now part of an active investigation. Nobody spoke. Then the buyer asked the question everyone was thinking. Why would you do this? My father finally looked up. For the first time all evening he seemed old, tired, broken. Then Ethan suddenly stood.
Dad.
The room turned toward him. His face had gone pale. Because he had finally realized something. The vacation, the flights, the resorts, the luxury villas. Every dollar he'd spent in the Maldives had come from money connected to a fraudulent sale. And if the sale was reversed, that money would have to come back.
Somehow.
Then my father whispered something that made my stomach drop.
3 words.
I needed cash. The attorney immediately looked up.
Why?
Dad closed his eyes. And for the first time, I realized the vacation was never the real reason. It was just the excuse. My father stared at the floor. Nobody spoke. The buyers, the attorney, my mother,
Ethan.
all of them waited. Finally, the attorney repeated the question. Why did you need the money? Dad looked exhausted, like a man who had spent years carrying a secret and had finally run out of strength. Then he said something none of us expected. It wasn't for Ethan. The room froze. Ethan blinked. What? Dad rubbed his face. The vacation wasn't the reason. My stomach tightened. Then what was? For years, Ethan had been the golden child. Everything was always about Ethan. The best gifts, the best opportunities, the endless excuses. But now Dad was saying the entire vacation story was a lie. A cover. The attorney folded his arms. Then where did the money go? Dad didn't answer. My mother stood.
Slowly. Carefully.
The way people do when they're afraid of the answer. Richard. Her voice cracked. What did you do? Dad closed his eyes. Then finally whispered. I lost it. The room went silent. I lost all of it. Nobody understood. Not yet. Then he looked up. And I saw something I had never seen before.
Shame.
Real shame. Not embarrassment. Not fear.
Shame.
It started 2 years ago. My stomach dropped. Because 2 years wasn't a mistake. 2 years was a double life. The attorney frowned. What started? Dad swallowed. Then said one word. Gambling. The room exploded. My mother physically staggered backward. Ethan looked shocked. Actually shocked. As if he genuinely hadn't known. The buyers exchanged stunned looks. Then Dad kept talking. The words pouring out now. Sports betting. Online casinos.
Loans.
Credit cards. More loans. Larger bets. Larger losses. Everything spiraling. Everything getting worse. Then came the final number. The one that made the room silent again. I owe $380,000. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because suddenly the house sale made sense. The forged documents. The desperation. The cash. The panic. All of it. Then my mother whispered, "Oh my God." Dad nodded. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the front window. At something outside. Something that had just pulled into the driveway. 3 dark vehicles. And, judging by the expression on his face, the people inside weren't lawyers. They were the reason he'd been desperate enough to sell a house he didn't own. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of my parents' house. Nobody inside the dining room moved. My father looked like he'd seen a ghost. The buyers exchanged nervous glances. The attorney frowned. Then one of the SUV doors opened. A large man stepped out. Then another. Then another. None of them looked like police. None of them looked like lawyers. My stomach tightened. My father immediately stood.
No.
It came out as a whisper. My mother stared at him. Who are they? Dad didn't answer. Because he didn't have to. The fear on his face answered for him. The front door rattled.
Once. Twice.
Then came 3 hard knocks. Nobody spoke. The attorney walked toward the window, looked outside, then slowly turned back. Are you expecting visitors? Dad looked sick.
No.
The man knocked again.
Harder this time.
Then my father's phone started ringing. Everyone jumped. He stared at the screen. His hand was shaking. The caller ID simply read, "Unknown number." The room watched as he answered. "Hello." A calm voice replied. Even on speaker, it sounded dangerous. "We need to talk." My father swallowed. "I told you I'd get the money. You said that last month." Silence. "You said that the month before too." My blood ran cold. Because suddenly everyone understood. These weren't collectors. These weren't bankers. These were the people he'd borrowed from. The voice continued. "You sold the property?" My father closed his eyes. "Yes." "And where's our money?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Dad looked around the room. At the buyers. The attorney. My mother.
Me.
Then whispered, "I don't have it." The silence that followed was terrifying. Then the man on the phone laughed. A short laugh. The kind that wasn't funny. The kind that made your skin crawl. "That's unfortunate." The call ended. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then my mother sat down. Slowly. Like her legs could no longer support her. I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. Because the attorney suddenly picked up one of the documents from the table. "Read it again." Then his face changed.
Completely.
"What is it?" I asked. He looked directly at my father. "Richard." My father looked up. The attorney held up a loan document and quietly said, "According to this paperwork, you didn't just use the house as collateral." The room froze. My father's face went white because whatever was written on that page, he clearly thought nobody would ever find it. The room went completely silent. My father didn't need to read the document. He already knew what it said. The attorney slowly lowered the page. "What else did you put up as collateral?" Dad stared at the table. Nobody spoke. Then my mother whispered, "Richard." He still wouldn't look at her. That was answer enough. The attorney placed the document in front of him. "Answer the question." My father finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, exhausted,
Defeated.
and for the first time in my life, he looked like a man who knew there was no way out. Then he quietly said, "Everything." My stomach dropped. The buyers looked confused. The attorney wasn't. "What does everything mean?" Dad laughed bitterly. The house wasn't enough. The room froze. My mother grabbed the edge of the table. "What did you do?" His voice cracked. "I used the retirement accounts." My mother went pale. "The savings." Silence. "The investment accounts." The room spun. Then came the final blow. The life insurance policies. My mother looked like she couldn't breathe. 40 years. 40 years of saving, planning, building a future. And he'd gambled all of it. Every penny. The attorney slowly closed the file. "There's more." Nobody wanted there to be more. But there always was. The attorney slid another page across the table. A beneficiary amendment. My mother read it, then froze. Completely froze. I grabbed the paper.
And immediately understood why.
3 months earlier, my father had attempted to change the beneficiary on multiple family policies. Removing my mother. Removing me. Removing everyone. Replacing us with a single name. A woman. Someone none of us recognized. My father looked away. My mother began crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The kind of crying that comes when something inside you finally breaks. Then the front door opened. Everyone jumped. 2 police officers stepped inside. The room went silent again. The buyer's attorney had apparently made a call while we were distracted. One officer looked directly at my father. "Richard Collins?" Dad nodded. The officer held up a document. "We need to speak with you regarding allegations of fraud, forgery, and financial misrepresentation." My father's shoulder slumped. The fight was gone. Completely gone. Then he looked at me and said something that shocked everyone. There's one thing I never told any of you. The room froze. Because whatever was left, it was apparently big enough to confess now. The room became silent. Even the police officers stopped moving. My father sat there staring at the table. The confession he'd spent years running from was finally catching up to him. What didn't you tell us? I asked. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked at my mother. Not me. Not Ethan. Her. And suddenly, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. There was never a gambling addiction. The room froze. My mother blinked. What? The attorney frowned. The betting accounts are real. Dad nodded. Yes. Then what do you mean? He took a slow breath, then said the words that changed everything. The gambling was just where I hid the money. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because suddenly the story no longer made sense. My father rubbed his face. 20 years of lies seemed to collapse all at once. Then he looked directly at my mother. I wasn't losing the money. My stomach tightened. Then where did it go? His answer came immediately. To Ethan. The room exploded. My brother shot to his feet. What? Dad pointed at him. You. Ethan looked genuinely stunned. Dad, I didn't know. I know. Silence. Then Dad laughed bitterly. The whole reason I started moving money was because I was terrified you'd fail. Nobody spoke. I kept paying your debts. Ethan froze. The credit cards. Another silence. The business loans. Ethan sat down. Slowly. Like his legs had stopped working. Dad continued. The gambling story was easier than admitting I'd spent years secretly rescuing my favorite child. The truth hit harder than any twist. Because suddenly I understood. The vacations. The excuses. The favoritism. The golden child treatment. Everything. My mother started crying. Not because of the money. Because she finally understood why our family had been broken for so long. Dad looked at me. Then at Ethan. Then at the police officers. And finally lowered his head. I ruined my family before I ruined my finances. Nobody argued. Because nobody could. The officers stepped forward. My father stood. Didn't resist. Didn't complain. Didn't make excuses. As they escorted him toward the door, he stopped once. Looked back at us. Then quietly said, I kept saving the wrong person. The door closed behind him. And just like that, the man who spent his life protecting my brother lost everything trying to do it. A year later, the house was returned to the trust. The buyers were compensated. My mother rebuilt her finances. And Ethan finally learned something nobody had ever taught him before. Being someone's favorite can become the worst thing that ever happens to you.